How did you know that? Ruth's eyes almost bulged out of her head. She was more shocked than embarrassed that Dustin could tell so much about her health just by looking at her tongue. Everything from the migraines to diarrhea was spot on. Was he really that good, or did he just make a lucky guess? There's a lot you can tell about a person just by looking at him, Dustin said nonchalantly. Do you believe him now, Ruth? Natasha smiled. At the same time, she also heaved a silent sigh of relief. Thank goodness Dustin knew what he was doing. He just got lucky. Ruth refused to admit defeat. I'm sorry, Mr. Reese. She's just too stubborn for her own good. Please ignore her, Natasha told Dustin apologetically. It's fine. Shall we begin? Dustin didn't take Ruth's attitude to heart. He walked over to Andrew and gave him a thorough checkup. It didn't take long for him to find out what was going on. It was obvious to him that the old man had been poisoned. The poison was pretty potent too. Thankfully, it was discovered early on, so he could still be saved. Another day or two, and he would have been lying in the morgue. Ms. Harmon, can you get me some silver acupuncture needles? Dustin asked. No problem. Natasha waved a hand. Immediately, one of her bodyguards went out. 5 minutes later, he returned with a set of acupuncture needles. Thank you. Dustin nodded his thanks, then began to take off the old man's shirt. First, he tapped his knuckles against the old man's stomach to make sure he was hitting the correct positions, then began to place the needles in the correct pressure points. His actions were light but firm as his hands flew deftly. With his skill, his patient would not feel any pain from the needles. Seeing this, Natasha was surprised. He's good. She didn't know much about acupuncture as a medical practice, but she knew some experts in the field. From what she could see, those old experts had nothing on Dustin. His actions were one of an experienced and talented healer who had spent years in practice. She was curious about this man. Once all 16 needles were in place, Dustin breathed a sigh of relief. It had been some time since he last performed acupuncture, but thankfully he was still familiar. Is that all? Nothing changed. Ruth looked confused. Your grandfather has been poisoned. It'll take about 2 hours to drain the toxin from his body. You shouldn't remove the needles before the 2 hours are up, or there might be serious side effects. Ruth pouted. Why should I believe you? Ruth. Natasha glared at her sister. I need to go to the bathroom. Please watch over him while I'm gone, Dustin told the occupants of the room before leaving. Not long after he left, a group of doctors barged in. These were some of the most skilled doctors in the hospital. A balding man led the troop. Hey, who are you guys? Ruth crossed her arms. My name is Jansen. I'm the executive director of the hospital, and also the dean of the medical school. I'm here on orders to treat old Mr. Harmon, the balding man introduced. Ah, you're that famous Drive. Jansen, the best doctor in Swinton. Ruth was ecstatic. More like one of the best, Drive. Jansen said proudly, but yes, I am. It's great to meet you, Drive. Jansen, please help my grandfather. Ruth immediately moved out of his way. Clearly, she trusted Drive Jansen more than she trusted a youngster like Dustin. I will, Doctor. Jansen nodded. When he got nearer to the bed, he frowned. What's with the needles? What nonsense is this? As he spoke, he made to remove the needles. Wait. Seeing this, Natasha stopped him. What's wrong, Doctor? Jansen asked, annoyed. Dr. Jansen, I've already hired another healer. He said that my grandfather has been poisoned. We cannot remove these needles as there might be serious side effects. A pack of lies. Dr. Jansen snorted derisively. If these needles can cure ailments, then what are doctors for? That's right, Ruth agreed. Natasha, that Dustin barely looks a day over 20. How could he be a skilled healer? Please don't tell me you believe what he said. Then how would you explain the way he could tell that you're having diarrhea just by looking at you? Natasha asked. He He made a lucky guess. Ruth said. Ms. Harmon, all of the best doctors in Swinton are here. I don't know who you hired just now, but I believe he's just conning you. Do you really think our professionally trained doctors are not as good as a random guy on the street? Dr. Jansen asked. I know you're worried about old Mr. Harmon, but please, don't believe in these superstitions. It would just make things worse. That's right, Dr. Jansen has saved a lot of people. Don't worry, old Mr. Harmon will be safe in his hands. The other doctors behind him chimed in. Their confidence weakened Natasha's resolve. However, she insisted, we should wait for Mr. Reese to come back. Why should we? Ruth said. Maybe he's already gone, Natasha. Ms. Harmon, I'm a busy man. I'm not going to waste any more time here. If I pull out these needles and anything happens to old Mr. Harmon, it'll be on me. With that, drive. Jansen pulled out all. Dr. Jansen pulled out all of the needles. As soon as the needles were removed, something strange happened. Andrew's body began convulsing, his face began to turn black, and blood gushed out from his nose and mouth. The machines on either side of the bed began beeping. What's going on? Dr. Jansen was surprised by the turn of events. What's this, Dr. Jansen? Natasha frowned. That's strange, he was fine earlier. Dr. Jansen felt uneasy. Sir, the patient is coding. Quick, get the machines. Without delay, Dr. Jansen began emergency resuscitation. Even after a lot of effort, Andrew did not seem to get better at all. In fact, his stats were declining uncontrollably. Dr. Jansen was panicking. Ms. Harmon, I think old Mr. Harmon is dying. What? Both Natasha and Ruth were shocked. You useless thing. Natasha was livid. She grabbed Drive Jansen by the collar and yelled, I told you not to remove the needles. Now that the worst has happened, this is all you have to say. No, this has got nothing to do with me. Dr. Jansen shook his head fervently. It must be that other healer. His needles must have caused this to happen. Natasha slapped him. Stop pushing the blame on others. I'm warning you now, if anything happens to my grandfather, I'll end your life. At those words, Drive Jansen paled. The Harmon family was powerful enough to get rid of him without anyone knowing. What's going on? At that moment, Dustin entered. When he saw Andrew's state, he frowned. Didn't I tell you not to remove the needles? He asked with displeasure. Why didn't you listen to me, Mr. Reese, just now? Before Natasha could explain, Drive Jansen shot forward and grabbed Dustin by the collar. So it's you who placed the needles? He shouted. It's your silly needling that caused old Mr. Harmon to go into critical condition. You're responsible for this. Dustin was a convenient scapegoat that he could use to avoid the blame. Am I right to presume that you were the one who removed the needles, then? Dustin raised an eyebrow. So what if it's me? Nothing much. I'm just a little curious. How did you become a doctor when you're so unskilled and irresponsible? You. Shut up. Natasha pushed Drive Jansen away, then pulled Dustin over to the bed. Mr. Reese, we have no time to lose. Please save my grandfather, Ms. Harmon. He's just a conman. He won't be able to do anything for your grandfather. Don't be scammed, Dr. Jansen said angrily. If you think he can't do anything, then why don't you do something? Natasha glared at him. Dr. Jansen was rendered speechless. If he could save Andrew, he would have done so earlier instead of standing around. Just as Dustin was about to begin his treatment, Drive Jansen said suddenly, a word of warning, young man. Old Mr. Harmon is a man of influence. If you fail, you'll have a lot to answer for. If that's so, then I'm not treating him. You guys can deal with it yourself. Dustin had no wish to continue arguing with them. He turned and made to leave. You bugger, shut your craffle. Natasha was livid. She slapped Drive Jansen again. The slap was so forceful that Dr. Jansen stumbled and almost fell to the ground. Seeing his swollen face, Dustin felt vindicated, even though he remained expressionless. Natasha's expression changed into pleading when she spoke to him. "Please, Mr. Reese, the Harmon family will owe you a big favor if you can save my grandfather. It won't be easy. The toxin has been aggravated, so it's more aggressive now. Acupuncture alone won't be enough to cure him. I need something else," Dustin said. "I will give you whatever you need," Natasha said. "I'll need a 1/4 pound of caterpillars, a 1/4 pound of spiders, and a 1/4 pound of cockroaches. Fry them and seal them in an airtight container. EW, why do you need those things? How gross," Ruth said in disgust. "Stop your yakking, go find those items." Natasha glared at her. Reluctantly, Ruth went out with her bodyguards to look for the insects. Soon, they came back with a container filled with fried insects. "Ms. Harmon, after I finish the acupuncture treatment on your grandfather, please open this container and place it in front of his nose and mouth," Dustin said. "Will do," Natasha nodded. "I shall begin." Dustin took out his silver needles and took a deep breath. Then, he gathered his concentration and inserted the first needle into Andrew's lower abdomen. With a flick of his finger, Dustin made the needle rotate quickly. A sliver of energy entered Andrew's body through the needle. His second needle went slightly above the first. Dustin inserted it without any hesitation. The next 3 needles were placed quickly and determinedly in a straight line from the first 2. Interestingly, Dustin did not just stick the needle into Andrew. Instead, he was slowly forcing the needles upward from the abdomen. With every needle he placed, Andrew's skin bulged slightly, as if something was crawling underneath his skin. "What nonsense." Dr. Jansen pursed his lips disdainfully. "Acupuncture is a bunch of crap. It's not even based in science." "That's true. He's just embarrassing himself." The other doctors in the room were also whispering amongst themselves. They clearly had no confidence in alternative medicine. When Dustin finally placed the last needle, he was drenched in sweat. What he did was not regular acupuncture. It was the long-lost art of miracle needling. Miracle needling could raise the dead, but only if the performer had the internal power to do so. It was a draining task, so he only used it for emergencies. "Ms. Harmon, the container," Dustin reminded. Natasha opened the container hurriedly, and a pungent smell filled the room. Andrew got the brunt of it. "More absurdities." Dr. Jansen snorted again. "Do you really think some needles and fried insects can save a man from dying? Just because you can't, it doesn't mean others cannot," Dustin replied lightly. "If you succeed, I'll eat this container of insects," Dr. Jansen said. Just as he finished speaking, Andrew opened his mouth for the first time after days of being unresponsive. A black centipede crawled out of his mouth, attracted by the smell of